It was a kind of suburban afternoon where nothing seemed urgent. Birds chirping, lawn sprinklers ticking back and forth. The kind of day when life feels safe. I was standing in our driveway, chatting with my neighbor about paint colors, while my 13-year-old daughter, Sophie, roller skated in lazy circles nearby, giggling as she tried to spin without falling. I remember smiling, thinking this is what life should be. And then everything changed. Out of nowhere, Karen from the HOA, yeah, that Karen, came storming down the street like she owned it. Her eyes were wild, one hand clutching her phone, the other digging into her handbag. "You can't do that here," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Sophie. At first, I thought she was yelling about the skates, or maybe the chalk drawing Sophie had made on the sidewalk the day before. But it didn't make sense. None of it made sense, until I saw the glint of metal in her hand. A taser. My stomach dropped. Before I could even move, there was a crackle, and Sophie hit the ground like a rag doll, her skates clattering across the asphalt. "Mom," she whimpered, her voice small and broken. I sprinted to her, my heart hammering so hard it drowned out everything else. But even as I knelt beside her, Karen was still shouting, waving her phone like a trophy. "You're trespassing. You're endangering the community." Neighbors had started gathering now, their faces frozen in horror, but nobody moved. Nobody helped. Just watched. And right then, I knew this wasn't going to be handled with words. Not the usual kind anyway. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Because trust me, you won't believe what happened next. I pressed my hands against Sophie's tiny body, feeling her chest rise in shaky, panicked breaths. She wasn't moving much, just staring up at me, her lips trembling. "It's okay, baby, I'm here," I whispered, even though my voice was shaking so bad it barely sounded like mine. My neighbor, the one I'd been talking to minutes before, finally stumbled forward, pulling out his phone to call 911. That's when Karen made her next move, marching right up to us like some deranged mall cop. "You're harboring a threat to the HOA," she barked, holding the taser like she was some hero on a mission. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear that thing out of her hand and throw it as far as I could. Instead, I stayed with Sophie. My first instinct was to protect her, not escalate it. But Karen wasn't finished. She turned to the small crowd of neighbors and started shouting about unauthorized gatherings, about enforcing community standards. Crazy stuff, like we were criminals for roller skating on the sidewalk. And to my horror, a few of them actually nodded along. That's when the sirens hit, high and sharp, cutting through the heavy silence. 2 cop cars, lights flashing, screeched to a stop right in front of our house. Karen lit up like she'd just won a prize at the fair. "There! Arrest them!" she shrieked, pointing at me with so much glee it made my skin crawl. One of the officers stepped out. A tall guy, early 30s maybe, but with this blank look, like he'd already decided who the problem was. My stomach twisted. If Karen could spin this her way before I even opened my mouth, we were screwed. I had to act fast. But what could I even say to fix this? The officer moved toward me with his hand resting on his belt, not quite threatening, but not friendly either. Behind him, Karen kept yammering about danger to community and citizens' arrests. Sophie whimpered again, and I instinctively shielded her with my body, feeling the asphalt bite into my knees. "Ma'am, we received reports of an altercation involving a minor," the officer said, his voice clipped and official. I could hear Karen laughing softly behind him, like she already knew how this would end. I could feel it happening, the story twisting against us, and I was helpless to stop it. "I didn't touch anyone," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I pointed straight at Karen. She tossed my daughter. The officer hesitated. Just a flicker. "Did you see the device?" he asked over his shoulder, glancing toward the neighbors gathered at the curb. There was an uncomfortable shuffle of feet and silence. No one spoke up, not one of them. My hands were shaking now, not from fear, from rage. Karen seized a moment, waving her phone in the air again. "I have proof," she crowed. Video footage. I wanted to scream. If she had doctored something or twisted it just enough, we were done for. The officer turned back to me, one hand tapping his radio. "I'm going to need you to stand up and step away from the minor, ma'am. For a second, I couldn't move. Sophie clutched my hand tighter, her fingers trembling. That's when more sirens split the air, louder this time, heavier. 3 black SUVs pulled in hard, tires screeching, and out poured a dozen more officers in tactical gear. SWAT. My throat closed. What the hell was happening? Whatever Karen had told them, it was about to get a whole lot worse. The SWAT team fanned out instantly, like they'd rehearsed it 100 times. Shields up, rifles ready, barking commands we could barely process. Sophie whimpered and tried to curl into me, and I wrapped my arms around her tighter. I wasn't going anywhere. Through the chaos, I caught a glimpse of Karen, standing off to the side, arms folded, a smug little smirk playing across her lips like she just orchestrated the grand finale of some twisted circus. She wanted this. She wanted to see us humiliated, maybe even dragged away in cuffs, all for daring to exist outside her perfect little version of community rules. An officer, decked out in full gear, stepped up shouting, "Separate the subjects." Separate me from my injured child. I felt something snap inside me, something deep, something primal. They weren't just coming after me anymore. They were coming after Sophie. The officer reached for my arm, but before his hand could touch me, I found my voice. No. It came out raw, low, almost shaking, but it stopped him for half a second. "She needs medical attention," I said, louder now, forcing the words past the fear clawing at my throat. "She's been tossed." The man hesitated, looked over at his team, looked back at me, and in that moment, that sliver of hesitation, I knew what I had to do. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just locked eyes with a commanding officer and said the 5 words that changed everything. Words that punched through the madness like a bullet through glass. "Check your body cams now." Dead silence. The whole team froze, hands hovering, radios crackling, confused glances darting back and forth. Karen's face drained of color so fast. She looked like she might faint. For a long, stifling moment, nobody moved. The only sound was the faint static on the SWAT team's radios, and somewhere, far off, a dog barking in another yard, like the world outside had no idea what was unraveling right here. The commanding officer, tall, squared off and no nonsense, narrowed his eyes at me. Then he touched his radio and muttered something low into my clip to his shoulder. Across the team, a ripple of movement, slow, deliberate, hands lifted from weapons, shields lowered just an inch. Karen's mouth opened like she was about to argue, but no sound came out. She took a single step backward, her eyes darting left and right like she was searching for an escape hatch that didn't exist. One officer, a woman with a tight blonde braid, stepped away from the group and started checking her own body cam, tapping a few buttons, her brow furrowing as she replayed the last few minutes. I could tell the exact moment she saw it. Her eyes widened slightly, her jaw clenching hard enough to make the muscles in her neck twitch. Another officer did the same. And another, and another. The tension shifted like a storm front blowing through. The commanding officer turned his head, slowly, almost like he couldn't believe what he was seeing, and locked eyes with Karen. His voice was low and dangerous. "Ma'am, did you discharge a weapon on a minor?" Karen stammered something, some mess of half-sentences and finger-pointing. But it didn't matter anymore. The truth was right there, crystal clear on half a dozen cameras. And just like that, everything flipped. Sophie whimpered again, and I leaned down, brushing her hair back gently. "It's okay now, baby," I whispered. "They're going to see what really happened." The commanding officer's whole posture changed, like a heavy door slamming shut. He barked a few quick commands, and suddenly, the entire SWAT team wasn't surrounding us anymore. They were surrounding Karen. She backed away, sputtering, her hands waving frantically in the air. "You can't arrest me," she shrieked. "I'm the one who called you. I'm the victim here." Her voice cracked in that desperate way people sound when they know, deep down, they've lost. 2 officers moved in, firm but calm, securing her wrist behind her back. Karen's face twisted in rage and disbelief. "I'm on the HOA board," she howled. "I run this neighborhood. You can't do this to me." But nobody was listening anymore. One of the officers came over to me, not rushing, not aggressive, just human. His voice was softer than I expected. "Ma'am, EMTs are on the way. Let's get your daughter checked out." I nodded numbly, still cradling Sophie close. She looked up at me, wide-eyed, trying so hard to be brave. I kissed her forehead, my chest tightening so hard it hurt. The neighbors, the ones who had stood frozen before, started to edge closer now, their faces shifting from fear to shame. Some of them couldn't even meet my eyes. I didn't care. Let them feel it. Across the street, I caught a glimpse of Mr. Dawson, the retired firefighter, pulling out his phone and recording everything. Finally, someone was standing up, not just watching. Karen was still screaming, still fighting, but it didn't matter anymore. The truth wasn't just some whispered thing between neighbors now. It was evidence, on cameras, on phones, burned into the memory of everyone who stood there. And for the first time that day, I wasn't scared. The ambulance pulled in fast, tires crunching against the curb, and 2 EMTs rushed over with a stretcher. I gently pried Sophie's trembling hands from my shirt and helped ease her down. Every little flinch she made slicing straight through me. She was trying so hard not to cry, and that broke me more than anything. One of the EMTs asked questions in a calm, practiced voice, age, allergies, medical history, while the other started checking her vitals. I answered on autopilot, my hands hovering uselessly in the air like I needed to do something, fix something. The whole time, Sophie kept asking, "Am I in trouble? Mom, am I in trouble?" I bent low until we were face to face and said, "No, sweet girl, you didn't do anything wrong. Not one thing." When they loaded her into the back of the ambulance, I climbed in beside her without a second thought. As the door slammed shut, I caught one last glimpse of Karen, cuffed, furious, spitting angry words at the officers like a wild animal caught in its own trap. At the hospital, once Sophie was settled and stable, a young detective showed up. He was polite, but I could see it. The seriousness in his face, the way he carried a battered leather notebook like it was armor. "We're opening a full investigation," he said quietly. "Given the video footage, the officer body cams, and the eyewitnesses, this is going to go a lot bigger than HOA violations." I looked over at Sophie, sleeping peacefully now under a warm blanket. I didn't care about the HOA anymore. I didn't even care about the neighborhood politics. This was about her, about protecting my daughter, and I was ready to do whatever it took. 2 days later, we were called to the police station to give official statements. I left Sophie at home with my sister, safe, finally, while I walked into that cold, sterile building, heart hammering in my chest. I wasn't scared of Karen anymore. But there's something about sitting across from a detective that makes you feel small, no matter how right you are. I told him everything. From the first screaming match in the driveway to the second Sophie hit the ground. Every detail, every sound, burned into my brain like a brand. When I finished, the detective nodded solemnly and slid a thick folder across the table. Inside were stills pulled from the SWAT team's body cams, crystal clear shots of Karen pointing the taser at Sophie, her face twisted up in rage. Sophie's body jolting midair. Evidence. The kind nobody could twist or bury. "She's facing multiple charges," the detective said, his voice steady but hard. "Assault with a deadly weapon on a minor, filing a false police report, inciting panic." I sat back in my chair, letting that sink in. Assault, panic, charges that didn't just disappear with a wink and a golf clap apology from the HOA board. "She also isn't the only one under investigation," he added carefully. That caught me off guard. Turns out, Karen wasn't just a self-appointed community enforcer. She had friends in high places, friends who looked the other way when she broke rules, friends who encouraged her crusades because it kept them all feeling powerful. But now, the whole rotten web was unraveling. And the best part? It wasn't just happening behind closed doors. It was happening in public, on the news, right where Karen had always loved to parade her authority the most. The fallout came faster than anyone expected. By the end of the week, Karen's face was plastered across every local news channel. The HOA vigilante who tasered a child over roller skating. Headlines didn't bother sugarcoating it. There was footage, after all. The truth wasn't just whispered to the neighborhood anymore. It was screamed from every living room in town. The HOA board scrambled, trying to distance themselves, releasing a limp statement about unfortunate misunderstandings and community values. Nobody bought it. Not after it came out that Karen had been warned multiple times before, that complaints about her harassment had been quietly buried by her friends on the board. Neighbors who once waved politely across driveways now crossed the street to avoid each other. Some came by our house, awkward, embarrassed, dropping off casseroles or notes of apology like that could undo what had happened. I appreciated the kindness, but something's cut too deep for a pot roast to fix. Karen's house, the one she used to keep so pristine with HOA fines and nasty notes, became a ghost town. A for sale sign popped up on her lawn within 2 weeks. The letters big and bold, like even she couldn't stand the sight of her own kingdom anymore. I'd like to say I felt triumphant, that I'd dance around my front yard or pop champagne on the porch. But honestly, I just felt tired and relieved, because Sophie was healing, because justice had cracked through the lies like sunlight breaking through a storm, because the nightmare was finally ending. Late one evening, Sophie crawled into my lap, wrapping her arms around me tight. "You saved me, Mom," she whispered, her voice tiny against my chest. But the truth was, she saved me, too. Spring melted into summer, and for the first time in months, our little corner of the world felt normal again. Sophie got back on her roller skates. Shaky at first, holding my hand, then faster and faster until her laughter echoed down the street like it used to. I swear, hearing her laugh again was better than any apology, any court ruling, anything. Karen was long gone by then. Her house sitting empty, a fading monument to her own downfall. The neighbors started waving again, awkward at first, but little by little, that old sense of community stitched itself back together. Not because of the HOA, not because of rules, but because people had seen, really seen, what happens when fear is louder than kindness and what it costs. One evening, Sophie and I sat out on the porch, sipping lemonade as the sun dipped low behind the rooftops. She tucked her knees up to her chest and looked over at me, thoughtful. "Nam," she said, her voice soft. "Are people like are going to keep happening?" I thought about it, about all the Karens of the world, all the people who hide behind rules and power, when what they're really hiding from is their own emptiness. I wrapped my arm around her shoulders and pulled her close. "Yeah, baby," I said quietly. "They'll keep happening. But so will people who stand up. So will people who protect each other. People like you." She smiled at that, a real, bright, unstoppable smile. And I knew she understood in a way even most adults never do. The world would never be perfect. But as long as we had each other, as long as we fought back when it counted, it would be enough. It would always be enough.